Hello everyone, this is episode 1 of Decolonising LSBU series. We thought we'd put this podcast together as LSBU is on its starting journey of decolonising the university and the curricula. We hope you enjoy, and we hope it's going to be helpful for anyone who's also starting out on this journey. Just to start, we're going to share our LSBU decolonising vision. So here it is. Before we start, I think it would be useful if everybody introduces themselves, and I'll just go with whoever's coming up on my screen first. Tara, you're up first. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, thanks, Mish. Hello, everyone. My name is Tara Dean, and I'm the Provost for London South Bank University, having joined the university in September 2021.
Leslie, you're next on my screen.
Okay, hi everyone. I'm Leslie Roberts. I'm a Deputy Director of the Centre for Research Informed Teaching, and I'm one of the leaders of the What Works for LSBU Racial Awarding Gap project, where we try to, we encourage research into interventions in narrowing the awarding gap.
Thank you, Leslie. Tony, you're next.
Thanks, Mish. I'm Tony Moss. I'm the University Director of Education and Student Experience. I have responsibility for our Access and Participation Plan, which includes aspects of decolonisation, racial awarding gap, and I work closely with Leslie on the What Works programme.
And Deborah.
Thanks, Mish. I'm Deborah Johnston. I'm the Pro-Vice Chancellor Academic Framework, and so I oversee the development of the Learning and Teaching portfolio and also have responsibility for the Access and Participation Plan.
Thank you very much, and thank you for giving us your time today. It's much appreciated. So I'll get on with question 1, shall I? And I'm going to ask Deborah and Tara if they would answer this. So let's start off with some background. What is the meaning of the colonial legacy in education?
So I'll come in first, perhaps, and then it'll be interesting to hear from Tara from her viewpoint as well. So from my perspective, the colonial legacy in education is a deep and continued process that has affected the structure of education globally and locally. And when I say deep and continuing, what I mean is that it's a process that has changed the structure of education in terms of, where are the centres of higher education? Where are the centres of higher education that are particularly valued? Who is in higher education? So who's in the classroom? Who is teaching? Who are the lecturers? Who are the professors? But the third element of this is actually what is deemed respectable academic knowledge. So for me, the process of that colonial legacy is, linked to, that very deep way that particular forms of knowledge are valued within higher education. So what is it that we think is, an appropriate subject for education or for research? What forms of experience do we particularly value? What kinds of activity are valued within the system? And so that, for me, is that sort of deep underlying process. Within that, for a university like London South Bank University, within this global higher education system with its deep inequities, it comes forward both in, who's in the classroom, what kind of experience do they have, who is teaching, who is researching, what kind of value is, placed on different kinds of knowledge and different kinds of activity. And so it really runs throughout what we do. It runs throughout the that very essence of, what do we recognise and reward as excellent research, as excellent teaching, as excellent civic activity?
Yeah, can I just add to that, Mish? I fully endorse what Deborah was saying in terms of who we teach, who what we teach, where is the knowledge base. But I think when it comes to decolonizing and the legacy of that, we have to make a distinction also between working through the past and working upon the past. And that's quite a distinction we need to make at university level. For me, in terms of dealing with the decolonization is very much working upon the past, asking the questions that Deborah just articulated herself. It's we can't really delete the past and what has happened, but asking those very key questions about what knowledge do we share, what knowledge do we want to make sure our students who are, ultimately global citizens of the future will have of what whilst they've been with us. So for me, it's very much kind of giving those sorts of lens through the education and research as well. So rather than necessarily thinking of the models and methodologies which have been developed by particular areas in the world, usually the Western world, what are we, in terms of advancing knowledge, are we paying attention to the broader opportunities to generate knowledge beyond the methods and methodologies of the past exercised by certain part of the globe?
Thank you, Tara. And as you were both speaking, I'm thinking about something else that Professor Gopal of Cambridge University says about, not only understanding about how we've misused the idea of data extraction from the South in research, but also we need to start to understand how can the knowledges from the Global South enhance our curricula, enhance our research as well, sort of flipping the negative narrative and sort of seeing advantages on both sides, as she says it, which I thought was a nice way of expressing it and understanding it. So, yeah, thank you for that.
And Misha, I'd very much agree. I think too often we see this as taking away from knowledge, as cancelling, editing knowledge. A decolonizing approach is actually about widening knowledge, and fundamentally it's about doing three things. It's about making our disciplines stronger and better, because it's about widening the forms of knowledge and debates that we include within them, forms of knowledge and debates that can be excluded when taking a Eurocentric point of view. It's secondly about making our activities as a higher education sector more transformative, so being more effective in what we do, either on the research side or on the teaching and learning side. And thirdly, it's about making us more relevant, more inclusive. So for me, a decolonizing agenda is about saying, actually, this is our role as a university in the future on a global scale. So I personally see it as an incredibly positive agenda of work that will actually say, this is what we as a university can contribute in a future globalized world.
If I could add, Misha, there was a particular, I think, as Deborah was talking about, the idea of almost the sort of the ways of being that we consider to be kind of acceptable as a very quick and unscientific piece of sort of data to throw in. I did a poll on Twitter last week, triggered by some conversations I'd had with colleagues, and it was asking whether people had been told or advised not to publicly speak because of the way that they speak. And out of the respondents, about 12%, and this was mainly academic colleagues responding, about 12% of people responding said that happened to them in their career. And both privately, kind of direct messages and replies to the comments, the two reasons given were class and race. So it was not sounding like being advised, and this isn't in an education context in terms of the experiences of our students, but the academics who are teaching our students. And that really sort of, really resonated with the point that Deborah was making about what we consider to be the sort of the acceptable ways of being, that we as professionals are experiencing that. And I think that's really problematic.
Wow, Twitter helps with lots of things.
The echo chamber of Twitter.
But moving on to the next question, what is the meaning of decolonising education? What is it? Why has it come about? Why are we suddenly getting on board to do it in different universities? And I think I'll ask Deborah that question, if that's all right.
Thanks. So I'll kick off. I'm sure colleagues will have lots of different views. So actually what I want to do first of all is I want to kind of set up, if you like, that kind of narrow view. So we know that in many universities, the meaning of decolonising the curriculum has been actually wrongly narrowed. It's been wrongly narrowed in terms of a focus on racialized awarding gaps in the classroom. Now, this is really crucial and key, but I think often in the service of that, I think that the very concept of what decolonising has been reduced to something far narrower than the image that we've just set out and talked about. And that's important because what I'd say is that if I take what my own personal view is, and it's the view that I think is quite well aligned to the strategy that or the vision that you shared at the start. For me, it's about changing our ways of assessing what we do. So is what we do transformative? Is it appropriate? It's about changing what we value as an organisation. So what activities are important? What activities are activities that will be recognised as being excellent? And it's about changing how we include people. And that, for me, it's a process. So I suppose for me, decolonising isn't that one-off step, the idea that you do it once and that's it. It's about the way that we embed a wider set of questions and a wider set of values in all the things we do, in how we hire, how we promote, how we evaluate teaching excellence, how we listen to our students' voices. And it's about ensuring that we're embedding that and can be seen to be doing that and be felt to be being seen as one thing, but being felt to be doing that. So, does the university feel different as this process continues over time?
With my, starting understanding of decolonising the curriculum, that it is about a university lifestyle change, if you like. It's not just a simple limited definition, because it's lots of different things in different contexts for different universities, because they'll do things differently depending on their own policies, people and other contexts. But it is about tackling inequality and injustice in its core, isn't it? That's what it's trying to do. Otherwise, why are we talking about decolonising? Because there is injustice and inequality.
And no, absolutely. I mean, one of the things you said is that it's about a lifestyle change, and that's really important. It's about a university-wide change, because absolutely in any university, and LSBU is definitely one of them, there will be thought leaders, there'll be practice leaders, there'll be areas of fabulous practice, there'll be course teams where we would be hugely proud to have them in the university. But crucially, if we think about what decolonising means as a university, that's about widening that, and that's about embedding it and being able to say that actually we feel really confident that across the whole university we don't have those pockets of racialised bias, of discrimination, of inequity. And so I'm saying that because in my last university, I was in a university that had a really long and deep history in terms of its debate with the impact of the colonial legacy. And what I've been seeing over time is that, where you had those thought leaders or those really active student groups, you had areas and moments in time of really fabulous conversations, important changes in practice, demonstrated impacts in terms of outcomes. But then, when those colleagues left or when those student groups disbanded, there'd be a tendency for practices to kind of revert back to like a baseline. And it's the issue. How do we actually make a step change where we can say that we have a continued resourced, because resource is a part of this, embedded approach to making that sustained change. So it doesn't depend on, 3 fabulous colleagues in one division here or a group of really motivated students there. It's about how we build that in and give it a longer life.
When Deborah was talking, it is a decolonizing, and the meaning of it. We are at a very interesting juncture because it is really an opportunity to kind of either recover or even create a alternative vision for the university, which is whether it's free of its colonial legacies, institutional racism, various other, inequality. There is a real opportunity here. But as Deborah said, it has to be really, really embedded, so it's not dependent on 1 or 2 individuals who are passionate about this area. And I think universities have a way to go to make sure we reach that position where we have, through this decolonization movement, have created a very different type of institutions, which, are, giving us an opportunity to really transform our teaching and research practices. So I think it's a real opportunity at the moment, but it is resource dependent. It does mean that our policies, the people we have, our expectation, the knowledge we impart, all has to be kind of shifted and made very different and delivered very differently. But for me, it's a real opportunity.
So I'm thinking about our staff members and the different levels that they're on, the different journeys that they're on to change a mindset about decolonizing. And we do have these passionate thought leaders who are well advanced, and we have people who are not so well advanced. What we do have at LSBU, I think, is a lot of passion and commitment for social justice. So in thinking about how we help our staff members who are on the first steps of these journeys, who are perhaps, they're caught in a curriculum bubble, they can't see outside of what they were taught, the way they were taught and the way their lecturers were taught. They can't see that there is a curriculum beyond that. The way I think that we can touch their hearts, bring them with us, is from that point of that understanding of social justice and finding then a way of linking social justice with decolonizing. And I know you said we don't, there's no simple definition, and I agree with you. And we have our vision statements, but in thinking about decolonizing the curriculum in particular, I wonder if it would be useful for LSBU to actually have its definition of what it means for us, so that we can help our staff members at the beginning of that journey who have a commitment to social justice but can't quite see that decolonizing the curriculum is part of delivering a socially just education. I wonder if we can have some kind of definition for LSBU.
I would say until we've reimagined it, I don't know how we're going to define it. For me, that's kind of we need to reimagine it first, and then we'll know what does that look like for us, and how would we describe it and define it for LSBU. But there's this framework, as you're talking about hearts, there's this framework I go back to when I did my senior teaching fellow for HEA. I brought up this framework. It's a Siposetel framework. There I go referencing like an academic. It's called Head, Heart, Hands. And it says the easy part to do is impart information. You give people all the information that they want, yes? The heart is that critical inquiry. Now it matters to you. Now you've got to review, have those critical conversations, start to understand deeply how it may be reimagined collaboratively with the students, with every many stakeholders in the university as possible. And the hands part is about praxis. It's about getting movement into action. And Sipos says very clearly in a sort of the teaching learning sense that you have to get to an education bit, an information bit, where there is some primary understanding. Otherwise, you're not going to get into the deep critical understanding to then create movement. So I thought, as you said that, Leslie, I was thinking of that framework.
If I could add a point, Mish, it was, I think for me, it's one of the biggest barriers kind of societally when we talk about decolonisation. And it is, as I think Deborah said, this idea that it's about removing things and about censoring. And for me, that's one of the most frustrating framings of decolonisation, because I think it may put some people off thinking about it, and even going back, it was just a couple of years ago, there seemed to be a lot of talk all the time about almost decolonisation being distilled down to, have you checked the racial profile of your reading list, for example, as if that would do it, and that would be a decolonising act. And I think there is a really important message for colleagues, particularly those that have not necessarily engaged or are wondering, what's decolonisation all about? To take a practical example from my own discipline in the addictions field, I would go so far to say if you don't understand, racial injustice and social justice issues and so on in the context of addiction, you don't understand addiction. You could specialise in addiction neuroscience, but if you don't understand the role that social inequality plays in outcomes for people, both developing problems with addiction and their likelihood of recovering from them, then actually you sort of know nothing about your subject. And so there is really a subject level, that it's about enriching and adding and developing a stronger and more sophisticated understanding of the subject matter. It's not about saying we're not allowed to have this person on a reading list or we're not allowed to talk about this issue. It's, for me, a sort of a fully decolonised curriculum at a course level would be an intellectually far more challenging curriculum than one that hasn't been.
Thank you, Tony. And it's a good job you were there, because I'm going to ask you a question now. It's a nice segue into asking you this question. So what are the persistent outcomes for BME students that need disrupting?
So I'd really crudely split this into two things. And I say really crudely because actually they're completely interrelated and not at all distinct. So the starting point, and I think possibly why we're seeing more discussion of decolonisation across the sector, is that we're now being regulated on outcomes for students based on racialised awarding gaps. And I think the discussion for me across the sector that is happening that's more productive is actually, rather than focusing on the outcomes, it's looking back at the process. So just to sort of look at, in an LSBU context, the racialised awarding gap for our BAME students, it sits at around about 14% now, and has been over the last few years about 3 or 4% a year. It's been reducing. So there's evidence that we are doing things, and we can actually see within the subject and a course level areas that have taken more action seem to be making more significant improvements. So as an institution, we're moving in the direction, but nonetheless, that difference in good honours, so students leaving with a first or a 2-1, when you're comparing white versus BAME students, a gap of 14 or so % is still way too much, and we need to eliminate that gap. So that's the thing that needs disrupting. But that, for me, that's the outcome. We can't focus on disrupting an outcome, so to speak, because that's the thing that happens at the very end of the journey. So the other part of it, and the much more challenging part that really needs disrupting, is actually the whole experience. It's the bit that happens in the lead up to you getting an award at the end of your degree and going off to take your next steps. So I think rather than the outcome that needs disrupting, I think we disrupt the outcome by focusing on the process and the experience that our students have. And I think through the work that's been particularly led, I think, by colleagues in the access and participation groups, the student focus groups that we've held and so on and so forth, there are clearly differences in experience that our students have. And even this morning, an article actually that Deborah had shared from Wonky, looking at students' experiences of belonging and so on. Students from minority ethnic backgrounds are feeling less included in universities across the sector, not only at LSBU. They're feeling less included, feeling less that the door isn't as open for them to participate, and that's the sort of the more subtle element, if you like, because that could be much more driven by implicit biases and so on and so forth. And then there are the explicit acts of racism that students may experience as part of the university community. So for me, I think the big challenge that we've got in terms of what we need to disrupt is that if we want to change the outcomes for our students and have equity of outcome for all of our students, I think we really need to look across the whole experience that we've designed, how we've designed our courses, what are the things that we are teaching on our courses, what experiences and voices are not being heard when a student is studying. But also in the more practical sense, literally on a particular day of the week, in a particular classroom situation, are there students sat there who feel less able to participate, feel less able to contribute, to speak up, or whatever it may be? And so I think it's a really big challenge, and I think it's one that we have to and we will address it. But that, for me, is the big disruption that needs to happen. Our students, whoever they are, whatever their background, should come to our university and feel fully able to participate, fully able to express their views, and also to hear from us as the professionals in the room, to hear from us that we have an understanding, and also actually, dare I say it, for us to reflect the fact that in some cases we don't have an understanding, and actually we'd like to learn from our students, because there's only so much of an understanding of different experiences that colleagues could have. And I think that for me is the thing that needs to be disrupted if we want to ultimately achieve the goals that the regulator, that's the challenge in a way. It's making sure we don't just focus on the metrics, because the regulator will get us on the metrics, but actually the thing that really matters, a bit like the NSS, it's not the metric at the end itself, it's have we actually given our students a really good experience.
I want to kind of extend this to postgraduate and postgraduate research particularly, because the experience that they have at undergraduate level to a degree would also kind of have an impact on whether they want to carry on at postgraduate level. So when you look at the statistic that we have something around 20,000 PhD studentships in the country, and only 1% goes to BME students. That's quite a stark figure, and many of them, the experiences they have had during their undergraduate years has been prohibitive for them to want to carry on studying further. We have quite a critical issue when it comes to postgraduate research students in certain subjects. So there is only one Black UK domiciled PhD students in physics in this country. So these are the sort of things that we need to address.
Metrics are important, but not for doing the tick box exercise. They don't give us any answers. They give us the place where we can ask the questions. They help us find where we can start asking the questions. And I think we do our students a disservice if we only focus on awarding gaps, because the awarding gaps tell us how many students made it through. And just this chimes with what Tony was saying. If we look at the metrics, say for progression, then we can start asking questions about who's not progressing and why is that happening, and what can we do for our students to help them to feel that they are part of the university and help them to succeed.
So thanks, and I've really found the comments earlier have been really powerful and really useful. And I just wanted to say as well, then I think the kind of the other way, or the other important context to give this is that we can't look at differences in student outcomes on their own. So if we think about what are the factors that lead to differential student outcomes, they are many and they are varied. However, they also overlap with some of the other elements that we talked about. What's the profile of the staff that students are seeing? Do they feel that it's an environment where they see people like them being hugely successful, being rewarded? Do they hear about research which is speaking to the experiences and knowledge that they're bringing into the classroom? And so I do think that it is so while it's really important that we recognize that so the vision that we've got has got a series of statements, and actually I think it's 8. Is that right, Mish? And
Yes.
and of course those are separated out because we need to have we need to be able to get away from general high level statements to begin to say, and this is what we're going to do, and this is what it will begin to sort of feel like. I guess the point I want to make is, of course, there's interrelationship between those things. And so, we can't just assume, we can only work on the student experience here and not work on the issue of, what our teaching staff is like, what our general environment is like in terms of the ability to talk about race, to talk about racism, what kinds of, what are the different ways that we bring in a wider set of knowledge. So they are interrelated as well.
Thank you, Deborah. I know you're going to have to leave us, which is a shame, very soon, but really enjoying your contribution to this. Tony and Tara, I'm going to go to you with another question. What is LSBU as a university doing in regards to decolonising the university and enabling equity and justice in education? It's a very big question, but over to you.
Thanks, and thanks. That is a big question, and I think that's as you described at the start. We have our vision, and I think the position that we're in now is that we're actively turning that vision into action, because otherwise it is just a statement on a page. I think we have without kind of just listing off a sort of series of actions, I'm just trying to think about a useful way of framing what it is that we're doing. And I think the key thing that's driving the way that we're making decisions about what to do is probably best summarised by taking a co-creation approach. And both locally and institutionally, where we're, I think, maturing in our ability to listen to the voices of our staff and student communities to understand what the things are that need to change, because at both an institutional level and a structural level, but also in those local instances, what decolonisation looks like it won't be a cookie cutter. There isn't just a sort of simple approach that we take. And so I already mentioned that we have the access and participation, or Act for Change groups that have been set up that actually sit around a range of different areas, including race, but also disability, students from lower socio-economic status backgrounds, and so on. And those are staff groups that comprise the thought leaders and the colleagues that are both passionate but also extremely knowledgeable about these areas, and have been, over the course of the last year or two, been adding, I think, significantly to the development of things like our vision statement, as well as helping, certainly from a senior leadership perspective, helping people like me to understand better what it is that we need to do. We've also been engaging with our students to listen to the student voices and to understand the things that actually would matter to the students. And that's been a really interesting exercise because, of course, there isn't a consistent view from a student perspective about the sort of things that would matter. There are polarised opinions between students that, you know, in terms of certain actions that may have more or less relevance to them personally, or they think are more or less of a priority. But I think through that process of engaging with the community across the institution, we're in a position now where we do have an action plan that has been formulated, particularly focusing on what the key things are that we should be doing. The interesting thing about that, and I think at the end of our discussion we were going to focus more on some of the specific things, so I won't go into the details of those now, but the particular thing that struck me when looking at the range of different things that were suggested by our staff and student community that would be important as part of our whole decolonising approach, is that actually there were quite a few things that we are already doing. And I think what really struck me, particularly those things that I myself am involved in leading, such as personal tutoring, it hadn't, I have to be honest, necessarily occurred to me that would be something that would come up in a discussion about decolonisation as explicitly as it did. And what I think that's giving us an opportunity to do is that in those areas where, you know, as in any big organisation, there's a tendency for projects and things to take on a life of their own and sort of pursue, you know, sort of move forward under their own volition. I think it's giving us a really valuable opportunity to say, well, actually, you know, what's the decolonising lens on this? You know, if we're already doing something, we've got resource and we've got commitment and we've got plans, how do we actually make sure that we don't miss a trick, that we don't potentially have to come back to that initiative in a year's time and say, oh, we did it slightly wrong, you know, because now we're looking at it again. And so I think that co-creation sort of community-led approach, I think, has been and I think will need to continue to be really powerful, because it will shape both the new things that we need to start doing that perhaps we already are, but I think also can make sure that we get the maximum possible benefit from the other things that are going on. So I think that's broadly, I think, a hope and a helpful description about the things that we're doing.
If I can add to that, you know, so Tony highlighted some of the actions we kind of already working on and developing. For me, what we need above everything is to have leadership commitment to decolonization. That is absolutely vital for any university who is talking about decolonization, to have that commitment right from the top. So I hope, you know, by having myself, Deborah here, it demonstrates the commitment we have to this, which will then cascade, you know, into all the actions we take. As Deborah said earlier, it's about who we have, who are our staff, you know, and when we are recruiting staff, are we aware of the additionality they bring because of their background, cultural background, their knowledge from other parts of, you know, global south and so on. So it cascades all the way down to who we employ, what we teach, how we research, you know, and research is a very good example, Mish. For far too long, the standards of Research Council have dictated how we do international research. So despite the fact that there is a big push for international collaboration, but it is what UKRI has in their format and framework. I remember encountering that as a researcher during the GCRF funding, where my partners in parts of Africa, in Malawi, they all had to produce a set of acceptable receipts, which is acceptable to UKRI, to be funded, where they were working in very different conditions, collecting data and information in setting where actually paper was not available, you know. So I think it all cascades from the leadership down all the way to the staff, to the co-creation, to our practices, our policies. So it really is multifaceted. I think for me, one of the reasons that I was attracted to LSBU is what Leslie ensured, and the intertwining of that social justice, which goes hand in hand, So I felt this is an institution which has commitment to that, which is really embedded at all levels of the institution. And decolonization comes part of that. So it's very much multifaceted, but we certainly have commitment to it at the institution, at the highest level. So
thank you, Tony and Tara, for that. I think it's very interesting about the leadership, because it kind of like organizational change 101, that's one of the things that comes up, isn't it, that leadership directs culture, and culture change. So that's an important point. And also I was just thinking about the UKRI. I remember a group called Ladders for Action showing some data around COVID-19 research, and how at that point when they did it, it's not true now, that there was zero funding grants given to any research that was led by a Black lead investigator, and it was zero. So that was really interesting. Around the time it was happening, and there was resistance by UKRI to accepting that data as well, which is really interesting. But it's just it came to my mind when you said that. But yes, leadership and visibility. So staff, students, everybody in the university are aware, and it's been promoting that this is the vision that is going to help transform the university. That needs to be very present and frequent, in how we promote what we're going to do for our transformation through decolonizing the university. So that's very important, visibility as well of what we're going to do. So this leads me on to the next question, which is our last question, and this is for Leslie and Tony. What is the strategy or future plans, and how is the university, that's LSBU, going to measure impact from changes that have come about through the decolonizing transformation methodology? Over to you.
So I want to talk specifically about the changes to the curriculum and to teaching. And I think that one of the most important things that we're introducing is the curriculum framework, which is changes to the curriculum that all courses have to embed from next academic year. And alongside that curriculum framework are course development plans. So it's not just the here's what we'd like you to do, and that includes things like decolonizing the curriculum. It includes embedding employability and academic skills to uncover the hidden curriculum for students, to create equality in our education. That's the curriculum framework. But it's the course development plans that are going to enable each course to develop their own action, but enable us to be able to evaluate those actions. So the course development plans are 3-year plans that need to be revisited and evaluated year on year, and how you evaluate that will depend on what your 3-year action plan is. But it essentially is a piece of action research that we're asking course teams to do, and I think that will give us a clear picture of what is really working and what needs to be changed and redeveloped. within the courses. So that I think is a really positive change.
So if I could add to that in terms of the overarching strategy. So there is an action plan going to academic board very shortly, I think possibly even this week, that essentially brings together the thought leadership from our students and staff that have been involved in the access and participation plan discussions. And essentially within that action plan, they're the things that so first thing to say about the action plan is it won't remain the same. So I think the key thing is that we want to keep on framing the discussion about decolonising as a journey. So it's not a fixed point in time. It's not here's a series of actions. Once we've done them, decolonisation will be done. But it's the things that, particularly from a student perspective, it's the things that have the highest impact and that they consider to be the highest priority. So there are other things that the students have suggested we should look at, but actually they've effectively said this is where we think we should be focusing first. That includes some of the things that Leslie was just referring to in terms of decolonising curricula at a local level, the actual courses that students are taking with us, and issues around universal design and so on. But more broadly, there are other areas included in the action plan. One of the ones that came out very strongly from the students was this desire to co-produce and co-create with us. Now, that's very interesting because I think there are, so from my own subject area background and for many other academics, the idea of co-production will be second nature if that's something you happen to do in your discipline and you understand how to avoid it being done tokenistically. You understand that it's not essentially just going to students and saying to them, can you design your own course and experience? There is a room there's space in the discussion for professional knowledge and expertise. And I think one of the actions that we need to take is to look at how we can support all colleagues to understand how to do co-production well and how to do co-creation, because it should not be tokenistic, and nor should colleagues feel that listening to students and hearing students is tantamount to them being told that your professional knowledge counts for nothing. And I think there is a staff development need actually across the sector, not just at LSBU, but we'll start with ourselves first to understand how to do those things well. Linked to that, I think partly again on this sort of question about how we can support our staff to take some of the actions that we need them to take. Students said that they would really value having more spaces to talk about race and racism, experience and so on. And again, I think there is a need to help colleagues to understand how to do those things, because as we all know, there'll be lots of occasions where it's not that staff are unwilling to have those conversations, but they might feel quite worried about it. They might feel quite worried about thinking, I don't want to say the wrong thing, or what if I cause offence, and therefore opportunities for discussion with students about different lived experiences, different experiences in society more generally may not be happening just because people don't necessarily feel confident about how you do that and how you do that in a way that doesn't feel patronising or potentially offensive. There's a whole range of other things linked to sort of personal tutoring, pastoral support for students, and particularly discussions around transitions for students as they go on transitions both into university and also across their time at university, moving from one year to the next and then beyond. And actually, this is something I think is very positive and puts us. I think we're in a good position within the sector to be able to do something potentially really quite innovative and sector leading because of our group structure. Because one of the things that certainly as far as our access and participation plan is concerned, the OFS require universities to be looking at what they can do to help improve attainment within schools. Ironically, my own personal view on this is that I think the way it's being expressed sounds like actually quite a colonial approach, in that universities are somehow going to fly in and fix schools. And I think that's quite offensive if you're a professional working in that sector, that somehow academics know better than you how to deliver good outcomes. I think the group structure that we have lends itself to actually having a two-way conversation that we can learn. It's not just about what can we do to help young people coming from school and college to transition into university. Actually, I think a big lesson that we need to learn as a sector is what is it that we're doing that makes that transition so problematic in the first place. It's not just about the fact their college didn't prepare them. There are clearly things that we're doing that perhaps we could stop doing or do differently that would make the transition be a lot smoother for a lot more students. So that's an area I'm particularly excited about, because there is leadership buy-in across the group that we're a part of, and lots of interest from the principals and leaders of the academies, for example, wanting to have those discussions, wanting to see what we can do to help their students, but also being willing to share their knowledge and understanding about what it is that their students may find challenging in those transitions. So that doesn't cover everything that's in the action plan. There's a whole range of other things. The way in which, just onto the final point about measuring, is that we are recruiting a research fellow for decolonising across the institution. And the reason that post was created very specifically as a research fellow post, not as a project manager or anything else, is that we absolutely want to support colleagues to think in that kind of theory of change, logic model type way of doing things, to think about evaluation from the outset when designing interventions, but also because we want really rigorous evaluation at an institutional level, and we need people, or we need someone with the expertise to be able to support that on a full-time, permanent basis. So I think we are building capacity within the institution to be able to do that ongoing analysis and, really reinforce the things that are working, and the things that don't work, either fix them or stop doing them and do something else instead that's more impactful. So that there is a real commitment institutionally to measuring impact as well.
Yeah, mine was very small point. Is just Tony said it. Is our commitment should be kind of noticeable by us appointing this position on a permanent basis. I know many institutions have had fixed term intervention, bringing in people for 6 months, a year, but actually we committed to this area, and we want this individual to help us, in terms of ensuring we are kind of up to date with the best practices and can have a, evaluation in place. And for us, the permanent appointment of this individual is an indication of our commitment to this area.
And yeah, that's very exciting to hear about the permanency of that post. I just wanted to add, in terms of group, that we're already starting to look at a piece of research across the group, co-created with the group, that looks at barriers to diversity in science and scientific enterprise. So that's something that is happening now. The discussions are taking place now, and it is not as we don't want the university flying in and being imperialistic in its approach. It is proper joined up research.
Well, thank you for that. Interesting conversations that have arisen, and I think what I'm going to sum up, I think, because we've had a good discussion, and I think I'm going to sum up because I think what I'm getting is from all of you is that within this decolonising methodology, and the university has committed to it, and this wonderful opportunity of a research fellow permanent post as well, it's that's amazing as well, is that under this decolonising methodology, lots of things are being discussed, but not only discussed, things are being raised, and collaborative, collective actions happening, not just, a kind of deficit approach, but a real, I think, installation of hope approach, which is the way I'm kind of hearing it, that it's hope for a better reimagined future, and a commitment for that, not just an idealistic venture. And I'm hearing that through the conversation we've just had. So yeah, thank you for that. And if anybody has seen me on a podcast, I always have to end with a quote. So forgive me for this indulgence. And I'm going to go with Desmond Tutu, because I've always had a soft spot for him because of the way that he brought the humanity into his activism and wanting equity for all in South Africa. And his quote, I'm picking one of his quotes, is, "Education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. Education is not preparation for life. Education is life itself." Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.